Let me just address what I wanted to address. I want to vote for Gayton because he's currently my favorite leader. Not by far. I'd like to see what Tutuzane is going to do over the next few years. I like Musi Maimane as well. He believes in legalizing illegal foreigners, for example, which I very much am against. There's a couple of other guys that are pretty dope, but I'm not feeling the ANC. I'm not feeling the EFF. I do agree, and I've had Musi here, I've had Bongani Baloyi, I've spoken to Herman Mashaba. Without saying it directly, they are saying the DA is a racist party. And these were people that were in their given leadership positions. So who best than them? The person you're speaking about is probably Rob Hersov, who is a mutual friend of myself and Gayton's. He probably does, in some way, help assist the Patriotic Alliance. I don't know because he's never told me directly. But the association and the friendship would have you assume. And it's not just Rob and his money. Rob has a really great network. And Rob is quite an influential guy. He comes from a very influential family. So I can imagine if Rob says something like, oh, I love Gayton, he's great. Some of his friends, a lot of white people, but he's also friends with some well-off black. I'm not aware of any Indian and colored rich people that he knows, but he probably does. They would probably go and support that. And especially because he hates the ANC. So he's almost for anything against the ANC and the EFF. And Gayton happens to be a mate. So he might be funding. So to someone on the outside, it could look like Abo Rob and his people are funding a Gayton. And you're right. And it is something that all of us, including myself, need to always consider. Because if you know anything about history, if you know anything about how people move, you can't be naive about anything. Yes, Cape Independence is one of the things Rob supports, along with many other people. I do not support Cape Independence. I've never heard Gayton say he supports it. And if he does, I disagree with him if he ever says that. One of the things I've said to Rob directly is, and this was tongue-in-cheek, because I don't support Cape Independence. I was saying, I'll support Cape Independence if all of the citizens, specifically the rich white citizens in Cape Town, are barred from doing business in the rest of South Africa and cannot own any more businesses and properties in the rest of South Africa. Build yourselves from scratch. Because you guys want to isolate yourselves in the Cape, but still run Pick n Pay, Woolies, Capitec, ShopRite, Outsurance, all these companies, and milk. In the same vein, arguably, that South Africa milks the rest of the African continent and brings resources here. I'm like, cut the ties, don't own properties here, don't have business here, then have the Cape. But it was tongue-in-cheek to kind of explain that I think this is a silly thing, and it's you guys wanting to be like, we want an independent Camps Bay or an independent Sandton, as long as we can still suck money from Alex. And you're like, nah, that's rubbish. Gayton has gone on to support Israel. It's one of the things I don't agree with. I am not pro-Israel. I'm not pro-Palestine. To be fully honest, it is not a priority to me what's happening in the Gaza Strip, although I feel for human beings, innocent people that are being killed because of political squabbles, land issues, which have happened throughout history, etc. But I don't pick a side. I don't want people being like, so are you pro-Israel? I'm like, that rubbish when we've got bigger issues here is not for me. So it's one of the things that when Gayton spoke out about it, I was like, this is silly. He went on to try to defend it. I don't really care. The issue of the foreigners has been a hot topic. You and I have spoken about it. You and Ike Kumalo debated on my other channel on it. I still personally, and it still confuses the average man, I still personally have no issue with any human being that is trying themselves out in life, including Sam Holdings. That's why I said I could sit with Sam. I buy from Pakistani puzzle shops. I sit with illegal Nigerians, Zimbabweans, Malawians that I know are not here legally. Good people that wake up every day and work hard and try to get by because they're like, wait, where I come from at home, things are not great. And I get attacked for saying this. I get attacked for comparing economic immigrants from Zim to economic immigrants from KZN, the Eastern Cape. They're like, it's not the same. I'm like, I'll take it. But now we're speaking rule of law, which is now no longer about me. And we're speaking about borders which are colonial. And we're speaking about a Zimbabwe, a Malawi, a Nigeria, where I as a South African am not allowed to just go into that country legally. And if ever I'm caught, it's a crime. So we're like, look, we need to sort out the borders thing because it's what we inherited. And until we decide, we sit with Zimbabwe and we say, guys, this border thing is actually rubbish. We're going to have one ID, one identity document or whatever, one passport, at least in SADC, like what they've done. I think it's Namibia and Botswana. And then we can move freely. Until we've sat and had that conversation, which I think is also the failure of the ANC and other SADC leaders that should have done this a long time ago. Until then, can we please respect each other's space? I think so that's where the Herman and the Gayton thing comes in. But I just wanted to address that from my side. But the Cape Independence is something I don't support. And I wanted to specifically raise Rob Hersov's name, because I know when people are going to listen, they're going to be like, oh, he kept quiet because they knew I was speaking about his friend. He's probably co-opted as well. I like addressing these issues so that people are clear. Whether they agree or not, it's chilled. But at least it's addressed.
I think one of the biggest things that you need to remember about law is that law must be established. It must be practiced. It must be consistently practiced. And then it must set precedents for it to become established law.
Yeah, I forgot to touch on the white foreigners, because I largely agree with you.
Yeah. So the problem with the South African context of what is an illegal and a legal immigrant is that it is inconsistent.
It's based on a timeline. It starts here.
Yes. It starts here.
And the fact that conveniently so.
And then when it starts here conveniently so, and then it legalizes certain illegal foreigners, then automatically it starts to become problematic. And that's why you see applying the law becomes very difficult. So you look at the white South Africans in this country. Many of them came during the perpetuation of a crime against humanity, in which a minority government that did not have the mandate of the majority was the one determining who is legal and who is illegal. It actually told us at some point that black South Africans who lived in Bantustans were illegal South Africans. They couldn't just come into South Africa without a DOM pass. It also told us that even South Africans in South Africa needed a DOM pass to move freely. Otherwise, they were illegal and they had to be put behind bars.
Correct.
You all didn't accept that system because it was arbitrary. It had nothing to do with the majority rule, and the law was not in public interest. And this is where you now see us say, how come black South Africans have problems with black Africans, yet the Europeans who came into this country illegally, who came here to invade, who came here to steal property, who are continuing to hold on to stolen property, who continue to harm black South Africans, many of whom we are living with, perpetuated crimes against humanity upon black South Africans. You don't see them as illegals, yet they are harming you, they harm the public interest. But you have an issue with a black foreigner who comes from Africa who does not harm you. That's point number one. Point number two, the ANC itself, when it wanted to fight for the liberation of South Africa, they went into other African countries without any visas, without even passports.
Refugees, right?
As refugees and as exiles and as liberation fighters. There was a unique
situation.
It wasn't unique in any different way.
No, I mean unique in the sense that people understood that there were issues here. In the same way that you've been trying to highlight sanctions, if we as South Africans understood that you guys have an issue, we'd understand.
Right.
But as long as you guys sound like you're defending ZANU, it becomes difficult for us to then welcome you.
But that's the problem. What is defending ZANU? Because who said ZANU is a problem? You were told that by the people. So
black South Africans that left here left saying the apartheid government is a problem.
Yes,
and
100%.
Other African countries understood. But now when you're leaving Zimbabwe, but you're not saying ZANU-PF is a problem.
No, that's not why black Zimbabweans are leaving Zimbabwe.
No, I'm just saying I'm trying to explain the uniqueness of why
I understand.
Black South Africans were welcomed.
But we need to say, black South Africans were welcomed because of a crime against humanity called apartheid.
Sure.
Black Zimbabweans are leaving Zimbabwe because of a crime against humanity of illegal sanctions acknowledged by the United Nations that it said are destroying jobs, destroying basic services, destroying healthcare, destroying education, and then causing black Zimbabweans to leave Zimbabwe to come to South Africa. They're not leaving.
I want to add for myself also, and corruption. For myself. No, it's not you.
Yes, but according to you, it's corruption. But what study or what research can actually back up what you're saying?
I'm not debating. I wanted to add that for myself.
But you can't just say things because you feel like, or because the media told you to say that.
ZANU?
No, okay. We must use evidence to back up our claims.
We can debate ZANU.
So ZANU has never been proved to misgovern Zimbabwe. That's why its education system, even under sanctions, still is the best in Southern Africa. It has never been proved to be a problem, which is why it treats HIV better than even a South Africa that's not under sanctions. You see, so when we start looking at metrics,
these are the things that make people then troll you.
They troll me. They troll me, but the difference.
Because it's then like, go back to Zim then.
No,
Zim is so great.
But
then go back to Zim.
But it's the same thing. Europeans troll South Africa all the time, but they're living in South Africa. So why don't you tell them to go back to South Africa? Tell them to go back to Germany.
Those are facts.
Tell Bob Hersov or whatever his name is.
His name is Rob Hersov. Come on.
tell Bob to go back to where he comes from. Nobody does that, but they're allowed to complain. They're allowed to state facts that this is being done better in another country than here. But that's not to say that we don't appreciate South Africa. We're just saying, let's not use propaganda that has been created by the media to start bad-mouthing ZANU-PF without looking at the numbers or without looking at... So the sanctions are displacing people. So in the same way there was a crime against humanity of apartheid displacing the ANC into our countries, in the same way the ANC must now understand when people are displaced by sanctions, which in many ways Naledi Pandor has acknowledged, Fikile Mbalula has acknowledged. He's even started saying that Zimbabweans never came into South Africa before sanctions. Never said by the ANC before, but he's beginning to say that. Ramaphosa is beginning to say, these sanctions hurt my country. These people have to be displaced from their country. They come here. So there should be an acknowledgement of the similarities of the two. And that struggle that is happening in Zimbabwe, it means therefore South Africa has got to take a concerted effort to fight it, which is what Zimbabwe did for South Africa when ANC, PAC, and all these other guys were being displaced by the apartheid government. We just didn't sit. We fought wars. Hence, I keep insisting that Zimbabwe had to fight a war in Mozambique. It had to fight a war at the borders of South Africa and Zimbabwe. We had to fight wars internally. Namibia had to do the same, and so did Angola. We have to understand that that's what had to be done to end this crisis of refugees coming into the country. It might have taken a long time for South Africa to understand what is displacing Zimbabweans. But besides that, apartheid is one thing, but you must also understand that apartheid affected neighboring countries. They deindustrialized neighboring countries. They sabotaged some neighboring countries. They militarily attacked neighboring countries and lost these neighboring countries a lot of their infrastructure, a lot of their factories. And when we opened up to South Africa and said, let's begin to trade because South Africa is independent, apartheid companies that were being used by the Defense Council of the apartheid movement then went into our countries as companies going to do business, but they came with an unfair advantage that cannibalized our markets, killed our industry that was already suffering from the attacks of the apartheid government, the war, and the unfair advantage of apartheid. That causes the crisis that you see where Mozambique cannot sustain its people, Zimbabwe cannot sustain its people, Malawi cannot sustain its people. It's because of these factors that if you look at what they are, it's neocolonialism at play. And South Africa being a springboard of that neocolonialism through these white companies, through white capital, it continues to be a war that we have to acknowledge. So when refugees come into South Africa, because of Glencore and South African companies in Congo attacking, financing rebels, creating confusion so that they can continue to take resources with ease. When an Implats in Zimbabwe continues to take our ore, brings it to South Africa to process it because they won't build a processing plant in Zimbabwe, those jobs that are exported to South Africa will eventually leave a gaping hole in Zimbabwe, and those people want to come. So we need to understand the crisis that we're in together as Black people in this region by this continuous existence of an enemy among us. And that's why the issue of Cape independence is a threat to everybody. Cape independence is equivalent to putting an Israel in South Africa. Because once that Israel is established and the Cape colony establishes itself as it did in the 1800s, you will see that the West will arm it. They will give it nuclear weapons. They'll give it weapons to start attacking its neighbors. And guess whose neighbors? It's South Africa. So that they can begin to take land once again, as they did when the British and the Voortrekkers came here.
Very fair concern.
So these are the things that we're saying. South Africa's got to acknowledge that apartheid never ended. The apartheid weapons never stopped being used. The mercenaries continue to destabilize Africa. The companies continue to destabilize and sabotage Africa and to sanction African countries, to destroy their self-sufficiency, to destroy their companies, so that at the end of the day, they continue their domination. But when South Africa dominates the region, South Africans must understand that regional players and people in the region whose companies have been destroyed, whose jobs have been destroyed, will then become migrants and refugees in South Africa. And then when they come here, they will expect to be treated the way the ANC was treated when apartheid chased the South Africans into the region. Because when ANC went into the region, they did not say that we want to apply for refugee status. They said that we are Africans, Africa for all. Hence, when Chris Hani was arrested after the Hwange campaign in Botswana, Masire arrested Chris Hani and his group because they did not have papers. They also arrested them because they had weapons. They closed them in jail and they sentenced them to 6 years. But The AU sent people within 5 months to say you cannot say an African is a legal immigrant. You cannot arrest Chris Hane and his people who are fighting a liberation struggle. Release them. Masire was forced, not Masire, man. Kama. Seretse.
Oh, okay.
He was forced to release them. They had to be released.